Hi and welcome or welcome back. Today I will explore skin tone mixes in gouache a little bit. This entire endeavor started when I was watching Irodori's video where she painted portraits in gouache. I really loved the way the skin colors look here, so I asked her how she mixed them. Luckily, she remembered exactly what she'd done. And she told me she's using a modified Zorn palette with flame red and yellow ochre, as well as ivory black and titanium white. And she mixes in 2 blues for cooler shadows and color variety. The Zorn palette is a relatively old palette. It's probably been used since the 14th century BC, and it's basically a red, yellow, black, and white palette. It's gotten popular or well known because of the Swedish painter Anders Zorn, who used vermilion, ivory black, flake white, and yellow ochre. And nowadays, a lot of people use titanium white or cadmium red instead. Here's an example of the colors you can mix with the Zorn palette. So this is said to be particularly good for mixing skin tones. I own similar paints to Evie, so I tried recreating her palette. I don't have the exact same blues that she uses, and my white is called permanent white, but it's probably similar enough. I filled all of these into a little palette and got started. I'm afraid I didn't record my painting process, but this is the result of what I was able to paint using these. I'm usually very lazy about mixing colors, but I was surprised how much of a variety I could get out of these. And somehow this got me thinking about my other palettes and paints that I own. One of my favorite palettes or sets is this Holbein gouache set of spring colors. They have 4 seasonal sets and I own the spring and winter ones. Just looking at this palette, I thought, well, I do have a light ochre here and a vermilion. And if I really feel like I need to mix in some blues, there are 2 options here. The pale coral might also make a decent skin tone base on its own. My first step was to swatch all of these and try a couple of different combinations to see if this would work. As my paper, I'm using my Hahnemühle 100% cotton sketchbook. I already have something in mind for the front pages. I haven't made any progress with it though, so I'm working my way from the back to the front. I already have the sketch done that I want to use these paints for, and here you can see a bit of my other work in the sketchbook. To be honest with you, I'm not sure if I like the sketchbook or not, but Evie liked it quite a lot for her mixed media work, so I wanted to give it another shot. Please ignore the wrong title here on the page. It's the spring set and not the summer set, and I decided to call it skin tones or skin mixes instead of Zorn palette, because this is not the classic Zorn palette if it includes the blues. The light ochre and the vermilion mix a nice orange, which can be turned into a decent skin tone with a bit of white. Interestingly, the skin tone looks super similar to the pale coral, but there is a crucial difference once you start mixing it with black. But I will get to that in a minute. In fact, the pale coral looked so similar to the light ochre and vermilion and white mix that I double-checked the pigment information on the tubes just to see if it was a convenience mix of those 3. But the pigments are actually different. I also checked what would happen if I mixed the blues with my skin tone orange and did not like the result. At least not when used with the Myosotis blue. It looks okay when mixed with the Dayflower blue. If you mix the light ochre and vermilion orange with a bit of black, you get a nice dark brown. But if you mix black into the pale coral, then you get gray. And that's probably not what you want for your shadows on a portrait. If you want to try using these colors as well, I highly recommend staying away from the pale coral as your skin tone and instead mixing it from light ochre, vermilion and white. I got to work with these paints, and I think I started out a bit too dark for this particular subject. I had to go over her entire skin again a bit later with white to lighten it up. But I was pleasantly surprised by how much I liked the skin tone. I also learned that I really like using gouache in the sketchbook. Watercolors don't lift very well in this paper, but it really helps you build up layers for gouache. I don't like the watered down look of the gouache on this paper too much, but I like it when it's applied in thick layers. I rather like the way her lips turned out, and it is quite fitting for this particular model or subject here, but it might not work for most other faces, I guess. Her hand was quite a challenge. In the reference image there aren't too many shadows on it, so I kept it relatively light as well. The downside is that once I got done with it, I realized how much darker her face was, and it just didn't go together. So I ended up trying to lighten everything again. It's better now, but still not a perfect match. Her hair was by far the most difficult part, and I think that's because I got a bit lazy with my color mixing in between. At some point in between, I noticed that the vermilion and the dayflower blue, just the two colors, already mixed a really nice brown. The problem is, if you mix in black or white, it turns gray. I had used the red and blue mix for all of her hair basically, and just ended up turning it into this gray mess. I think the reason for this is because the dayflower blue includes white. In the end, I went over her hair again with a mix of the light ochre and vermilion and black, and used that to mix my brown instead. It just meant having to redo most of her hair a second time. But I'm glad I did, because for such a young woman, having grey hair is really not that fitting. So here is the finished piece with my annotations about the color mixes on the left side. I think in the future I would either try mixing the vermilion with a different blue that does not contain any white pigment, or use a pre-mixed brown, or just mix light ochre, vermilion and black. I'm just a bit lazy when it comes to mixing three colors, so I might just decide to get a pre-mixed brown instead. But I really love how the final image turned out. In my opinion, the skin colors look even a bit nicer than the modified Zorn palette, because my previous painting was relatively pink, I'd say, pink and reddish, and I prefer the look of this one a bit. If you own the set and you've tried it for painting portraits, I would love to see the result. This entire exercise helped me think about skin tones and other paints and palettes that I could try. For someone who doesn't mix too much, this was a really beneficial exercise. You'll be seeing a bit more of this in my upcoming videos. Thank you for watching and see you next time. Bye!